Okay, so hi everyone. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're doing well. If you're watching me, please do me a favor and leave me a chat. It will be very helpful. But yeah, I think we are live. What's up everyone? I hope you're doing well. I hope you're taking good care of yourselves. Welcome to this video. Now, I was just having some weird Saturday evening where you get bored and you feel like most of the stuff you're working on is not working. So I decided to at least pick up one of the projects that are dormant on my GitHub profile so that I can get to at least work on them. And then I remember that I made a live stream where I kind of built this simple application with Reflex. But then I covered only the front end part and forgot to actually build a backend, or actually I got tired during the live stream to the extent that I could not code anymore. So I just decided to get on here, make this video to talk about the backend aspects that are involved when building with Reflex. So I hope someone is watching. If you're watching, you can please leave me a hi in the chat. So basically, what we have is a very simple application. This simple application is one that I built in a live stream, and it is just so simple. It was just a simple blogging app that I was just trying to use to explain some of the concepts that are involved when building with Reflex. I'm going to be showing you the code, but before I do that, I think it's important that I first of all show you some of the features, the simple features that we talked about in that video, and then we can go ahead and look at the code. So this is a simple application. It's simply a blogging application. Now let me first test if we are live. I may be talking when we are not live. Let me try to just verify. Yes, hello Suraj. Thank you for joining. I think we are live. So let me just continue. So I was saying that the application that we have right here is the application that I was building in that live stream where I was talking about Reflex. We tended to talk about some of the front-end aspects that are involved in building with Reflex, and I introduced things such as how to create components, how to create state, and how to update state, and how to basically make lists of data render, just like you see right here. That live stream was long. It was about 3 hours. I hope this one will be at least shorter, because what we're going to be looking at is the backend, and the backend is so similar to Fast API. In fact, it is Fast API. Reflex uses Fast API on the backend to do the backend stuff. So we can pretty much use our Fast API knowledge to build a backend on Reflex without having to really learn any other backend way of doing things. So I've had a question. Where are you from, Jonathan? I am from Uganda, East Africa. Where are you watching from, Suraj? Your first API tutorial is the best. I'm from Nepal and wanted to thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really glad that you at least enjoyed my first API course. So basically, this app is a very simple one that has us having a list of data. Now this data is just dynamic. It's not dynamic data. It's just static data that I have on my backend, a list of posts. That's what I can say. And then we see that this data is rendered dynamically. So we have only one post component, but we are able to reuse it and render all this data with dynamic data, just like you see right here. So this is basically what we have. So we're going to also look at how we can create a database model and how we can create API endpoints that we can expose to this front-end application. So when I go to the detail, of course, I see that I have the detail of that application. So it's just a simple app. There's not so much going on. When you try to edit post, a simple model that I was working on that I forgot to actually style shows up so that you can be able to update, but I'm going to be covering how to update that in a minute. So if I to look at Reflex, Reflex is it's a web framework that allows us to basically build full stack web applications using Python. And the beauty with Reflex is you do not have to have any knowledge of JavaScript. In fact, You can build your app with Reflex without having to know anything about how to build web applications with JavaScript, but then it's advantageous if you have some little bit of knowledge about how web applications are built on the front end. So to begin, I will walk you through the code that I built for this simple application that I built and covered in that live stream. Its link is in the chat, so if you feel like you need to first watch that, then it's important that you go back to the chat. If you're watching me, please say hi. I am getting to a point where I feel I'm alone in this chat, so it will be helpful if you at least say hi. So let me walk you through the code that we wrote during that video, and then we can get started learning about the backend. So in a Reflex application, you're going to have a folder structure that is one that is similar to what I have right here. To begin, we're going to look at the web folder. So this web folder is where Reflex is going to compile your written Python code that you've written for the front end into a Next.js application that it will render in the browser. So if you are building with Reflex, of course, you're going to be using Python, but then Reflex in the background is going to compile your Python written code into a front-end web application, and that front-end web application is going to be a Next.js application. Then we're also going to have the static folder. This static folder is where all our static files are going to be kept. If you have things like styles, if you have things like images, then that's where Reflex is going to store all that stuff. Now in that video, I had created this styles file, which is called main.css. It has pretty much all the styles that I had set up in the video. So these are basically the styles that I set up for the various components that I built for that video. Another thing that we have is the Reflex block. So this is the main project folder, and you can pretty much set it up any way you may want. So this is basically what you as a Python programmer are going to set up so that you can be able to build with Reflex. But inside here, we have the most important file, and that file is going to have the similar name to what your project is. So for my case, it's going to be reflexblog.py, but keep in mind that this is the same as reflexblog. So if I go inside here, there is pretty much all imports, and then the most important part of the application, which is going to be the app instance. So the app instance is the entry point to all our application, and therefore everything we do within Reflex is going to be attached to the app instance. So for example, if we create things like pages, if we create things like API routes and anything, we are just going to simply attach it to the app instance. So the app I built had a very simple structure. It had only 2 pages. It had the create post page, the detail page, as well as the index page. So the index page is the home page, and the post detail page is the one to render the details of a post. And then the create post page is one that is set up to help us be able to create a new post. Now, if we're to look at what we have here, we have the index page. Let me try to go to it. So the way you define a component in Reflex is basically creating a function, and that function is going to be having a component that you want to return. Now, pretty much every component that you may want to build is already provided to you in here. So if you want to build, let's say, a box, which is sort of like a div, then you're going to call rx.box. Now I've just imported rx or reflex as rx. Therefore, each time I want to use a component of rx, I just say rx dot whatever I want to basically access. So inside here, you can even see that I have a navbar component. This navbar component is the one that's allowing us to navigate to different parts of the app. And I also have a box. So this box is basically a div, but that div or container is having a post list component. Now that post list component, if you're to look at the application on the front end, you'll notice that it's going to be this list of posts right here. So you can pretty much create a component the way you would do it with, let's say, React or Angular or any other front-end framework, and then be able to reuse it wherever you want to use it. So basically that's the structure of that app. If we're to look into our post list, we have the render post function, and that is a function that's going to get the data that is present for a particular post component, and then it will get a list, get the data, and then use that data to populate that specific component. So for example, here we are returning this component that is simply a box, and that box is going to have the post title, the link to the post detail. It's also going to have what happens when we redirect to that specific post. So for now, we can also see that it has a date at which we created the post and other details about the post. But the way it gets interesting is the way we actually render that post list. We render the post list by basically calling rx.forEach, which is basically kind of like how you would call a JavaScript map function. So what it does is to get the list of data that you are having within your your app, or the data that is coming from, let's say, an API, and then it's going to map each of the instances or each of the items within that list data into, let's say, it's going to map each of the instances of that data to a component and then render that component. So basically that's what will happen. So for each of the posts that we have in our post state, we are going to basically render a post component, which is basically this, but then we're going to map it to the data or the instance of the data that exists within that list, and that is what we did right here. So I'm actually planning on making a playlist where I will be talking about how to build with Reflex, and yeah, because I don't think it will make sense for some people for me to just talk about Reflex by focusing on the back end. So if I go back here, all the components are defined within a components folder. So I just set that up to make things a little bit organized. We have the navbar component, which is basically what we have on the front end as this upper section of the page. We also have the posts component. So the post list component is the one that we have here. You also have the render post, which is basically the one that's called for each of the items that exist within our posts list. Now, once that is done, we have the pages. So pages are basically also functions or components, just like the ones that we've looked at. Now you can basically see how easy it is for you to define a UI component or a UI input or a UI, let's say an HTML tag with Reflex. You just have to import Reflex, and all those are basically components that you can pretty much call and use the way you want. So this is the create post page, and all it's doing is to just render this form component, and within the form component we have different inputs, different labels, and we have a text area. We also have a button to submit that specific form, and we also have an action. So if we had submit this form, we are going to be in position to call a specific function, but this has to be defined on the state. And yeah, if you are really confused about what these are, I created a video. Its link is in the chat. So yeah, I just want to mention that so that you do not get confused about what we are looking for. So I also have the state folder. So the state folder is where I wrote the different state classes, and these state classes are basically the ones that are going to help us to keep data, modify data, handle events, and stuff like that. So it's like the backend, and it's stuff that we do not actually process on the UI. It's all done on the backend, and we can pretty much also call any other function or use any library inside these state classes. So for now, we have a function called load posts, and this is one that is going to update the initial state of posts to the post that we have, which is basically this dummy list of posts that I set up right here. And for now, all this data is coming from our dummy list of posts, but I'm going to be showing you guys how you can set up a backend for Reflex, and then how you can get working, and how you can build API routes that you can further expose for any front end to consume, including the one that you've built with Reflex. So I think that's all. The post data is here, and this is what happens. So basically, when you have your app instance, you're going to set up a lot of things, including the style sheets and any JavaScript that you may want to use, or any JavaScript scripts that you may want to use as separate from the Python code. You may also want to load and run functions. So that is what happens when I call the onload attribute. So it will just take in a list of methods that I have to call from state classes to be able to perform some functions. And then that's all. So what we're going to be looking at in this video is how we can construct a backend for an app that is written with Reflex. So Reflex offers us a way of being able to create database models, and those database models are going to be created with reflex.model. But then reflex.model is simply a wrapping of SQL model. If you looked at the first API beyond credit course, I talked about SQL model. What it is basically an ORM that maps onto SQL Alchemy, but then it's built in a way that is very, and then you'll have to basically use Alembic, because it works with Alembic in the background, to help you be able to manage the different changes or different versions of your database. So what you're going to do is to come within our Reflex blog folder. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this folder API. And once I call that folder API, what I'll do is to basically go ahead and, so let me first fix something here. So what I'm going to do is to create a folder called API, and to make this a Python package, I'm going to create a danda init.py file. And once I create the danda init.py file, I'm going to now create my models inside the API folder. So I'll just come right here and say that this is going to be our models file or module, whatever you may want to call it. So once this is done, we have to go ahead and create a database model. So a database model is a class, just like any other Python class. But what makes a model special is the fact that we can just define the entire structure of a database, including tables, relationships, attributes, and all constraints that we may add onto our SQL database within a database model. So to start, what I can do is to first of all import Reflex. So I'll say import Reflex as Reflex. And once I've done with that, then I have to go ahead and create a class. So I'm going to call this class post. I hope you guys can see the text, so I guess I'll have to make it a little bit bigger. So this post is going to be one that's going to inherit from, so I've imported Reflex as Reflex, but this is supposed to actually be Rx to keep things simple, but you can simply use any other letters that you can remember, but I choose to use Reflex or as Rx. So in here, what I can say is Rx.model. And this model class is basically the same model class as SQL model. So even if we are to go and inspect and be able to see where this class comes from, we shall notice that this is the SQL model class. So I'll click and control click on this class, and then we can see that this is basically a subclass of the SQL model class that we see here. So we can pretty much do everything we can do with SQL model when using Reflex. So we're going to create a simple database model, and this database model is the one that's going to be responsible for handling or being able to define the way we keep our posts in the database. So to start, I'm going to first of all provide a very important attribute in here, and that's going to be the one to enable us to use this as a table in the database. So I'll come and say table is going to be equal to true. And once that is done, then another thing we can do is to come right here and provide the danda name attribute. Now it's funny that this thing is a SQL model, but then it also wraps on SQL Alchemy. So anything you can do on an SQL Alchemy table can be done here, just like you're going to see. So what I'm doing is to provide the danda table name attribute, and what this is going to do is to basically define the name of the table in the database. then we are going to define the fields that we're going to need on this specific table. I am going to be using SQLite for this video, but please feel free to use any database that you may want. So to begin, I'm going to define my ID. I'm going to keep it simple. I'll say that my ID is going to be an integer, and this integer is basically going to be a field in our database. But what we want to do is to go ahead and provide a type and some constraints on that specific field. So to do that, we can use SQL models field function, and that will give us access to the various attributes that will give us the ability to define such things. So what I'll do is to come right here at the top, and I say from SQL model. Now keep in mind that when you have Reflex installed, it will install things like Fast API, SQL model, SQL Alchemy, and so on. So you don't need to go ahead and install them. So I'll say from SQL model, we are going to go ahead and import the field function. And once you have the field function, we can now define our ID as a field. And this field is going to have all the attributes that we want to have on this field. So for now, we see that we can define our primary key to be true. We can define its default to none, and we can also have it being indexed. If we want to go ahead and do things such as auto incrementing or doing things like, let's say, defining any other attributes, we may also use a special attribute called the SA column. So the SA column gives us the ability to define SQL Alchemy specific attributes onto an SQL model field. So I can say SA column is equal to, and then I'll go ahead and also import a function called column, or it's actually a class. So what you can do is to come right here and say column, and then we can pretty much define anything we want to define. So one thing we can see here is we have the type of the field, which is going to be the first thing that we have to provide in here. So for me to get access to most of the types of these fields, I can go ahead and access them from SQL Alchemy. So I can do something like from SQL Alchemy, or let me just import the entire module. I can say something like import SQL Alchemy dot dialects dot Postgres. Actually, I'm going to be using SQLite. Then I can import that as, let's say, SQLite, or let's say SA. So once I have that, then I can pretty much just specify the type to be something like, let's say, SA dot integer, SA dot text. Just like you can see here, you can be able to access all those types. So in here, I can just come right here and say SA dot integer. And now I can pretty much do anything like providing the default, providing a primary key, auto increment, and any other thing you can think about when defining an SQL database field. So all that stuff can be done right here. So another thing I'm going to do is define the other things. So I'm going to start with the title, because that's what we have. It's one of the attributes that we have for that specific field. So the title is going to be a string. Now those I can leave because there are not so much constraints I'd like to add on them. So I don't know if this is the title. What I may want to verify is if I have title and body. I want to also check within the data and see if I have the same thing. So I have title and body. So what I can do is to go in here and say that we can still have our title and the body. So the title is going to be a string, the body is going to be a string. We can also create a date. So since I don't have a user, I'm just going to simply keep it to a no relationship kind of database structure. But you can pretty much do all that and be able to achieve your database structure, just like we're going to see. So I can add, let's say, a created at, and that is going to be a datetime object. So I can just come right here and say datetime dot datetime, but then I haven't imported datetime yet, so I have to go ahead and add that. I feel like my computer is lagging somehow. So what I can do is to go ahead and import datetime, and once I've been able to do that, then I can also go ahead and specify the default for this one. So I can still use the field function, and then inside there is where I can provide as a column, and then I can use the column class to provide those specific defaults. So in here I can say that the type is going to be SA dot, I don't know if this is that time. Yeah, it's that time. Then we can have the default, which is going to be that datetime dot now, which is the current time when we have created that post, and then we don't want this to be now, therefore we shall leave it to this. Another thing we may want to specify is the updated at time. So this is something we shall update when updating the specific post. So this is a very simple example, a very simple application that I built, and I thought I left it hanging, and that's why I came back. So field, and then in here you can pretty much have these things, but one thing we can have is on update datetime.datetime.now, meaning that when you update the post, the data will be updated with the current time that we have right now, and then it will be not nullable, just like you see right there. So this is a very simple database structure that we have built. We can also do things such as defining the data-reprint method to just specify the string representation of the database model objects that we shall create from a specific model class. And once we've done that, Reflex handles your models in a very funny way. It allows you to be able to use Alembic to migrate changes to your database, or to keep track of the changes that you made to your database in all its lifetime. But the thing is, for it to work, you have to first create the migration environment. Now, if you haven't used Alembic before, Alembic is a migration tool for SQL Alchemy, and what it does is to go ahead and monitor your database and keep track of the changes that you've done to your database, and it does it in a way that it keeps revisions. So under the hood, Reflex has a command that allows you to manage those without having to directly call Alembic. So to access those commands, all we have to do is to call reflex db and then -- help, and that will give us an idea about how we can access those. So the first command is going to be the init command, and what it does is to help us create a database schema and migration configuration. So that is basically initializing your Alembic migration environment. And then we have make migrations, which helps us to create auto-generated Alembic migration scripts. So those are going to be ones to pick changes from our models and then keep them in a way that you can just apply them to the database. And then to finally update our database with the changes, all we need to do is to call the migrate command, and that will basically allow us to update our database schema from our migration schemes, or to apply our changes to the database. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and initialize our migration environment. So to do that, we can just say I was trying to say Alembic init, but this is reflexdb init, and then this is going to create a new folder within our project, which is going to be our migration environment. If I go back here in the chat, I have a comment. Thank you so much. You are given a lot of value. I am really thankful for your support. Thank you for watching. Can I get your LinkedIn? Can you add it on your description? I think I have my LinkedIn on my description. I think I do. Let me try to see. I think I have my LinkedIn on my description. Unfortunately, I don't have it. I think I'll add it, but let me first finish the live stream. So now that our migration environment has been created, we can now go ahead and try to update our database, or basically create our database. Now, the thing is, when you create a migration environment, we're going to have many changes to our project structure, including an Alembic folder that's going to have our versions and whatever configurations for Alembic. We're also going to have the reflex.db file, which is going to be the default database that is going to be set for us. But if we want to go ahead and do things such as, let's say, updating our database configuration, we can also set up what is called a database URL. So this database URL is going to be set up inside rxconfig.py by just coming right here and adding the db URL. So by doing that, you'll be setting the database URL for your Reflex app. But in case you don't set it up, we're going to be using reflex.db. So now that that is done, the next thing that is very important is to go ahead and import your model file, or import your database model class inside your home or main application. And the way you do that is by going to where your app instance is, and then you'll have to go ahead and import that model. So you go and import it. So for our case, we shall say from reflex blog dot, in our case it's going to be api dot models. We are going to go ahead and import the post model. And once we've imported the post model, now we can go ahead and trace this in a migration and also apply the migration to our database. Now I have a simple tool I use for viewing SQLite databases, which is called DB Browser for SQLite. So I'm going to open it up so that we can at least monitor the changes that have been done to our database. So let me pull that right here. One thing we can notice is if we have this database, it's already working even when we haven't yet pointed to it. So that's what Reflex provides. And one thing that we have created is the Alembic folder. This is very specific to Alembic. It's going to keep our versions in this versions folder. It has a env.py, which is basically the main configuration file for our migration environment. And then we are going to also have that script.py.markup file, which is basically a blueprint for how Alembic is going to create the version files or the revision files, just like we're going to see. So the thing is, once you've imported your database model inside your main project file or module, you do not need to tamper with anything that's present within your Alembic folder. All you have to do is to go ahead and run the specific commands that Reflex provides. So for now we have been able to initialize Alembic to work with our Reflex app. To make changes to our database, all you have to do is to go ahead and run a command, which is going to be reflex, and for our case we shall call db make migrations, and this is going to take in a message. So for our case we can say create post table. So one thing that we've seen is we have some errors, so we can go ahead and see what those errors are. So I'm seeing the error is can't locate any SQL dialect named default. So SA column equals column. So I think I've made a mistake while defining the models. So what I can do is to go in here. Let me actually also first verify which specific line led to that. So that's line 21. So I don't know if this is default factory or default column. So I guess I have to set it to default. It's actually going to be Oh, that's actually maybe going to be server default or something of that sort. Default or server default. And once that is done, then I think we can create our migrations again. So I have an error still. An argument arg is expected to be one of the classes of clause element or that text clause got built-in function or method. Let me try to see what happened here. sa.datetime. I don't know where this is actually coming from, but let me try to see. Yes, so I guess I'm making a mistake by calling server default. So let me just keep it to default then. So default is going to be that, and then even here I'll say default, and I'll run my migrations again. So I'm having valid syntax. Let me try to go back here. So line 28, that seems to be inside the migration itself. So let me try to see. Built-in method of type object that. So I guess I'm making a mistake when I run datetime.now. It's going to be a function, but it's not calling a specific function. I don't know if default factory is going to be built in that. Let me just try to find why that is that. Datetime and then server default datetime.datetime.utc now. But it seems like that is already deprecated. Okay, so instead of calling, I could call func.now from SQL Alchemy. Let me try that. So that means I have to delete this migration. And then I'll try again. So I guess I have to even delete the rx.db. Maybe having the migration stored. So what I'm going to do is to go right here. Default equals datetime.now. And then I can call func.now. So let me try that. If I say from SQL Alchemy dot SQL can import func for function, then I can go ahead and set that up. So instead of having default.now, I guess I can call func.now. And then I guess I can also do these things. So let me try replacing what I have here with func.now. What am I doing? Okay, so this is going to call that sql.now function. I think we are done here. Let me try to save and then try to create the migrations again. And just like that, we are having our migration created. So let's go back to our Alembic versions folder. Now we can see that a migration has been created, and this is going to have the changes that we are suggesting to make to our database. Now let's go ahead and update these changes or make these changes on our database. So to do that, we have to just go back to the terminal right here and say reflex db migrate. So make migrations allows us to create the migration, and then db migrate is one that's going to allow us to make that change to the database. So if we pull up our database GUI tool, I'll open the database. So that's actually found within my Reflex blogging app. I'll open it, and that's going to have our two tables just like you see right here. So if I enter in here, I am going to see that I have two tables: the Alembic version table, which is responsible for keeping the migrations or the versions that we've set up for Alembic, and then the posts table. If we see the structure of our table, we have the title, the body, created at, and updated at. So if we are to browse any data, we currently do not have any data, and that is just fine for us. Now that we've set up our database, which is a very simple database table, let us now look at API routes. So you can pretty much call any database query or any database stuff within your state classes, but then also Reflex allows you to be in a position where you can expose your application to API endpoints, and it does that by using fast API in the background, and that's what we're going to be looking at right now. So to start, what I'm going to do is to go to our API folder that we set up, and inside our API folder I'm now going to go ahead and set up our routes. So I'm going to create a new file, which I'm going to call routes.py. You can feel free and call it anything you may want. Inside this file, I am going to go ahead and create routes the same way we can create them in FastAPI. But we can also do something like defining handlers for specific routes, and then we register those handlers onto our app instance. So the way we do that, let's say if we wanted to define what the root endpoint, the root API endpoint that we can use on our API. One thing we can notice is all API endpoints are going to be present on localhost 8000. So if we go to localhost 8000, we shall notice that our API is running. So let me try to close this. Our API is running, and we currently have no API endpoint defined on localhost 8000. So the moment you run Reflex run, you are starting both a front end, which is on localhost 3000, and you're also starting a fast API application, which is running on localhost. Actually, you're starting a front end on localhost 3000 and a backend on localhost 8000. So for you to be able to set up your fast API application or set up the endpoint that you may want, all that stuff is done within this file called the rxconfig.py. So if you want to set up things like, let's say the API URL, the port, the routes, so all that stuff is found here. So you can configure the app name, the log level, the front end port, which is defaulting to port 3000, front end path, backend port. You can also set up the backend path, deploy URL, and all that stuff. All that stuff is going to be set within this class. But for our case, we shall leave it at localhost 8000. So what we can do is to go ahead and access that specific app instance. So I guess I have to go back where I was in reflexblog.py. And when I have access to the app instance, I can then go ahead and access our app fast API instance via app.api. So this is going to be a fast API application or a fast API app instance. And on this, we can pretty much call any method that you have on fast API. So you can add middleware, you can create exception handlers, you can pretty much do anything that you may want to do within a fast API application. So for our case, if we want to define a handler and just register it with its path, we can just say app.api. Let's say add API route, and that will be just taking in the path. So for our case, we can say that our path is going to be the root path, and after providing the root path, we can now go ahead and provide a coroutine or a handler for that specific request. So for our case, I'm just going to call this index, and remember this has not yet been implemented, so I have to come right here and implement it and say def index, or let's make it a coroutine. So I can just come right here and say async def, and then we can have this being one that just returns a dictionary, and this dictionary can be of anything. So I just say it's going to have a key that is any and a value of any. Any is what you use as an excuse when you do not have when you're not sure about the type of something, you just say any. So I can import all this from typing, which is an inbuilt Python module. So I can just come right here and say from typing, I can go ahead and import dict any and any. And then you can pretty much return anything you want to return. So for our case, I just return title home, welcome to Reflex blog. And once I save, then I'll go ahead and import that in here. So I'll just come and say from Reflex blog dot API dot routes. I'm going to go ahead and import the index route or the index handler. And once I've imported that, this will be registered onto this path so that we can be able to go ahead and run a request on that endpoint and get a response. Now, I don't know why I still have this. So I have positional argument. Oh, I have to remember that I'm coding Python. So what I'll do is to come right here and say that this is going to be the endpoint, and the endpoint is going to be the index function that we provided here. Now, when I save, our server is going to restart, and the front end is also going to recompile. But if it fails, then I have to go ahead and restart. So one thing I may have done wrong, I've defined this as so this is async def, and then endpoint is going to be index. Wonder why that is happening. Index was never awaited. This is strange. Then it accepts coroutine. This is going to be an endpoint, which is going to be a coroutine that returns a response. But then I'm asking myself why this is actually returning this error. Because if I went ahead and just did async def, which is actually a def, a normal Python function, I don't know if I'll still get that error. Let me try to restart the whole application. Okay, so the app is running. If I go back to the browser right here, I can now see that I have my response being returned. So basically what we have done is to create an API route, and then we just say it onto our app instance. So that means we can even create routers and configure our backend to have multiple routes that are related to each other. So what I can do is to go and create a router in here. So just going to create a posts router, and that is going to be an API router object. So I have to import the API router class. So I'll say from fast API. Remember that fast API is going to be installed, so you don't have to install it. So fast API, we are going to go ahead and import the API router class, and then we shall create a router by saying API router. Then we can define the prefix where all those routes are going to be. So for our case, we can say that our prefix is going to be on the /posts endpoint, and then on that we can simply go ahead and do anything that you may do on a normal fast API router. So I'm going to speed code the API routes. I'm going to start with the one for getting all posts. So I'll call this post router dot get, and then this is going to be on posts, and then this will return a list of posts. So what I can do is to just define it as get all posts or read posts, and I'll simply pass this for now. I'm going to create one for creating posts. So I'm actually going to be on the post router dot post, and for our case we can still send to /post. So say create post, so we shall need some data, but this is not going to be a dictionary, it's going to be a pedantic method. May actually go ahead and provide that and then define it later. So I just call this the post create model or schema or whatever you may want to call it, and then I'm going to go ahead and create the one for getting an item or a post item by its ID. So I can do something like post router dot, in this case, get, and then we can provide the UID of that specific post. So for our case, we can say post ID, and then the handler for that is going to be just like that, updating, put. We can even define a patch. So let me just actually define a patch. So for our case, we can say patch, and then that's going to be pass, and then delete. So this is going to be pretty straightforward. So what I do is to then go ahead and define the schemas. So I'll create another file inside our API folder, and that is going to be a new file. I'm actually creating it under bycache, but I'll go here, I'll create a new file, I'll call that schemas.py, and then in here is where we're going to create a pedantic models that are going to be responsible for allowing us to serialize and deserialize data. They're going to help us to validate the data that's going to go to the API via requests, and then it's going to help us to verify the output or the data that API is going to be giving as responses. So I'll import the base model class from pedantic by saying from pedantic import base model, and once I've imported base model, I am now going to go ahead and create the first class, which is going to be our post model class. So this is going to be like the main model schema. It's going to inherit from our base model. Our post will have an ID, so we've kept it simple. We've left it to integers. We'll have titles as strings. We shall have our bodies as strings. We shall have the created at date, and I don't know why that did like that. So created that is going to be a datetime dot datetime, or what I can do is to just import the class itself, and then we shall also have the updated at time. So that's a datetime object. So then I'll go ahead and import the datetime, and that will be it for our main post model class. Now what I'm going to do is to also create the post create model. So the post create model is going to have those fields that we shall need when creating a post. So I'll do something like title, which is a string, and then I shall have the body, which is going to be a string. Now for the one to update a post, we are going to have optional fields because we may want to I'm actually having something here. This is supposed to be from base model because I don't want to inherit, or I don't want to use most of the fields that I have here. So what I'm going to do is to keep it to base model. And then I can have optional title. So if you want, you can send an optional title and use the optional typing class. And then in case we do not have a title, we can leave the value to none. And then the same thing for the body. I have to import the typing optional class. So once these are done, I have to go ahead and import them. So I'll go back to routes, and then I will call our schemas module. So I'll say from .schemas, shall import a post create post model, and then we shall also import our post update model. I have a question in the chat. Is learning Reflex worth it? Just asking as a Django developer. Learning Reflex is totally worth it because not a lot of people get to use JavaScript to build apps. In fact, I personally one time used Reflex on a project I was working on, like on a project that I was working on, and I was being paid to actually build that project. And yeah, so Reflex is a framework that you can use to build your web apps if you do not have any experience using things like, let's say, React. In fact, it uses Next.js to be able to present the UI as you see it on the front end. So it's just one tool that you can look to if you want to build applications but you do not have experience building, let's say, React or any other JavaScript front end framework. I think it's worth learning because it does the work. I mean, you can pretty much do everything and still ship a website or a web app. But then, of course, JavaScript is the best programming language for the front end. So yeah, thank you, Random Shots, for that specific comment or that specific contribution. Yeah, so I've defined these specific endpoints or routes. Now I need to figure out a way of interacting with the database to expose that data. That is simple if you know how to use Fast API. So Reflex, just like you see SQL Alchemy or SQL model, gives us a way to access the database and carry out CRUD via the session object or the session class. But for us, we have to call a specific function, which is going to be allowing us to create a session object. Then that session object will allow us to interface with, excuse me, with our database, just like you may do in a normal fast API or SQL model, SQL Alchemy application. I don't know how many people have watched me because I feel I'm alone in this live stream. But it's all good. So let's start by I prefer to kind of structure my API in a way that I have sort of like what is called a service.py class, where I go ahead and define all the required operations or any other logic that I don't want to mix within my API endpoint. So that just helps me to have clean API endpoints that just call specific methods, and then you may interact with the database, perform various actions without having to write all that logic in our routes or API endpoints. So to begin, I'm going to go ahead and create a class. So in fact, I have to import Reflex as Reflex. And then I'm going to go ahead and also create that class. So I'll create a class. I'll call that class the post service. And then I'm going to go in here, and what I'll do is to basically initialize this class by saying def danda init self, but instead of saying self.posts, what I'm going to set up is going to be the session. So the session for our case is going to be rx.session, and this is a function that when you call it shall access the session object. So what I'm doing is to just hide this into this attribute, which is going to be the session, and then I'll be able to access it. Now I've done the same mistake. This is supposed to be rx, and now we can get access to this function that we shall call to get an SQL model session to interact with our database. With that being done, I can now go ahead and say def let's say get or get posts or get all posts or whatever you may want to call that. So get all posts is a function that's going to get all posts from the database in an order in a specific way. So what I'll do is to come right here and say with self.session as our session. Now remember, I have to call a function which I've actually forgotten. I can just simply go here and say with a session as session. Then we can go ahead and make a query to our database. So we are being told to use session.query, but one thing we can see is this method is deprecated. So what we can use is session.exec, which actually takes in a statement and then returns a result. So we're also being told that we can use session.execute instead of session.query. So what I'm going to do is to write a statement that is going to query all the posts from the database and order them in a specific way. So I'll come right here at the top, and then I'll say from SQL model, I'm going to go ahead and import the select function. And once I've imported the select function, what I'm going to do here is to create the statement. And this statement is going to be a select statement. So this will take in an entity or a table or whatever you want to call it, and then it will carry out SQL statements on that. So I have to go ahead and import that by saying from dot model. Since I'm within the same package, I can go ahead and import the post model, and then I can say instead of calling this statement, I can create a select statement. So our select statement here is going to be select for our case, it's going to be the post model, and then we can go ahead and do things like ordering. So by just saying select, we are saying select stuff from the table of posts, and then we can filter from statement, we can get children, group by, and all that stuff. But what we want to do is to go ahead and order this by negative created at. So what we are doing is to just go ahead and basically order them in a descending order of sort. So what we can do is to just say order by negative created at, or simply. So sometimes you can also call the table dot the column dot the specific criteria allowed, but for our case, we are going to just get them in a reverse order, with the latest being the first one being shown at the top. So I can just say by negative created at, and once I'm done with that, then I can simply use our session to execute that statement. So I can just say the R result is going to be equal to session dot exec, because that's the one to take in the statement. So in here we're going to need the statement, and once we've got the statement, now we can return the result with result.all, and that will be our function. So let's get the post by its ID. So to get the post by ID, we shall require to have the post ID. We shall use the same session. Now for our case, we are seeing that we are using this session.query, which we don't want to actually use. But what we can do is to use select post.where, and then we shall select the post ID. And once we are done with that, we shall get the first object that will be returned with that post ID. And once we've got that, then we shall return the result. So this is just basically a statement. I've done a mistake, and then I will go ahead and execute this statement with our session. So I'll say session dot, this is actually going to be a result. So and then we are going to go ahead and return this result. So can call that dot first method, and that will give us the first object. Then create posts shall take in the title and the body. Now this involves us creating a new post object and then using our session to add that and then to commit it. So if I say with self.session, a session post is going to be equal to a new post object with the title and the body, and then what we shall do is to go ahead and commit that in our database. But for us to get that specific updated post with the data, then we have to go ahead and refresh the post. So we refresh the session with the new post data, and then we return that specific post object. So another thing we're going to do is to go ahead and update. So I'm using tab9 AI to help me autocomplete this, and then I correct them depending on whether they are correct or not. So update post is going to take in the post ID. It's also going to take in the title, which is going to be optional, and then the body, which is going to be optional. So I have to import that optional type from typing, import optional, and then I can come right here, and what I have to do is to define the logic. So now that we have one that can allow us to get our post by ID, we get the post by simply calling session dot, this is actually, this can work, but then we have we already have a function that is going to help us do that, or a method. So we can say self dot get post by ID, and then we can simply provide the post ID. That's the beauty of object-oriented programming. And then when we return the post, we are going to check if the title is there or if the body is there, and then we shall commit. Now another approach that people can use is to go ahead and use a dictionary, and then they'll just go ahead and update the object they want to update with the key and the value of that specific dictionary. But I think this is quite a simple approach. So what I'm trying to talk about is, if you had the dictionary as the data that's going to come from, let's say, the client side, what we have to do is to just maybe do something like post data, and this will be a dictionary. And once we have this dictionary, we can just come right in here and update the post. So what we could do is to do something like I've made a mistake. Let me try to. So in here, what I can do is to do something like, let's say for key and value in post data dot items. Then we can use the special set attribute function, which shall take in the object and then update the key with the value. So I made a little mistake right here. So it will basically take in the object we want to update and then look for a key for that specific attribute, update it with the data for that specific attribute. And once we've done that, we can call session.commit and then return the updated post. So deleting the post is going to be somehow similar, though in this case we are going to be deleting it. So what we shall do is to just say with session, self.session as session, post is going to be self.getPost by ID, delete the post using the session and then commit and then return the post ID. So all this logic would have resided within my routes, but then I write it in here and then I get to access it within one place. So if I go within my routes, I can simply go ahead and do something like read posts. So I have to import the post service class. So I'll say from it's going to be from .service. I'll import the post service class, and once I've imported the post service class, I have to create a post service object or instance. So that's going to be post service, and then I'll go ahead and call post service, and then that's what I'll be using here. So our posts are going to be equal to a post. So we don't have any coroutines or any async functions here. So what I'll do is to just say post service dot get and get all posts. So this will return the list of posts. So I'll just come right here and say return posts. So we can actually first test this API endpoint to see if it is working. First thing we have to do is to go back to our project module, and then instead of add API route, in this case we are going to go ahead and register a router so that all the endpoints that are specific to our posts are going to be got. So if you come right here, what we can do is to say app.api. In this case we can actually include router, and that will be just enough for us to include the router. So we have to go ahead and import it. We'll go ahead and say it's going to be our posts router. So include router will take in the router, so we shall have our post router, and then if we have any other things that we haven't defined in our router instance, then we can go ahead and add them just like we do for a normal fast API application. So what we want to do is to test that specific endpoint. I am going to be using my client here, so please do not laugh at me. This is actually weird because this is the home page. So on the home page we are supposed to be getting the app, but then we're getting the API endpoint. That's weird. That's so weird. So let me try to actually see what's up. So API path slash, that's supposed to be on localhost 8000, not localhost 3000. Oh, yeah, it's working. But then I'm wondering why the API, the front end URL is showing something else. Did I do anything in my Rx config? No, I didn't. So I guess I'm in trouble right now. So if I go to slash posts, I have an internal server error. So let me try to see where that is coming from. Can't resolve label reference for order by, group by, or distinct. Textual SQL that should be explicitly declared as text that. Okay. So I need to go ahead and update that. So I think I can even go ahead and use the desk function that I actually forgot to. Can import that by saying desk, which is for descending, and then instead of saying order by negative that, I can just come and say order by descending, and then I can point to that specific column, which is going to be post dot, for my case it's going to be created at. Yeah, I think that's what that is. Do I have to restart, or it's going to compile on its own? Refresh. Now I'll see that an empty list of posts is being returned. Now to save time, I'm going to pull up my RESTFox. That's what I'm going to be using as my API client. It's just a simple minimalistic tool for making the API requests. So this is my RESTFox right here. I have my list of posts which is empty being returned, just like you see right here. So now let's go ahead and call the others. So to call the others, I'm going to go in here, and what I'll do is to just come right here. I'll start with the one for getting a post by ID. That is going to be as simple as saying that our post is going to be equal to post service dot get post by ID. And then we can provide the post ID. So I'll say post ID. Kindly say hi in the chat if you are live. I feel like I'm alone in this chat and it gets boring. So get post by ID, and then if not post, we can return an API exception. So we can do something like if not post, then we can raise an HTTP exception with a slash code of 404 not found. So I have to go ahead and import that. Then I'm saying from that API exceptions, we shall import the HTTP exception class and then raise the exception. Then finally, we shall return the response. So we can go ahead and return the post. Now, one thing that we need to do is to also go ahead and specify a way to serialize that object returned as a pydantic instance or a pydantic model. So I'll go ahead and set the response model, and the response model is going to be our post model. Now, what I can do is to do the same thing, but then I can return different responses for this. So what I can do is to come right here and say return our response model. It's going to be something like a list, and this list is going to be of post model objects. So that's exactly what we're going to be returning. And then we can now focus on the one for creating a post. So one thing that we need to note is that this post data that's coming from the front end is going to be got as a model object. So for us to get that data, we have to create a new post, and then that new post is going to be we're going to get the attributes of the post, and then we're going to create a post using that specific data, just like we see right here. So I'll do the same thing that we are telling me to do here with that data, and then we shall return a new post, but then I prefer to return some extra information with the response. So I can do something like, let's say, message post created successfully, and then we can have the post data, so new post, and then we can call post.model_dump. So that's a function that's going to be responsible for dumping it as a dictionary or as JSON. So once that is done, then I think we can now head over to updating and deleting, and then we can see why we had that specific error on the front end, where our API is simply returning on the front end URL. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to now go ahead here, have the post update model. So I just come right here and say our updated post is going to be equal to post service dot, in this case we have the update post function or method. It's going to take in the post ID and the post itself. So if you go back right here, we shall notice that this is going to be taking in the post data, not the post actually. So that was a mistake. I can say post ID and then post data. So if I can say post data, and this post data is going to be an object containing this data. So post data is going to be equal to, did I call it a dictionary? Yes, it's a dictionary. So that is going to be post.model_dump, because that function can just simply create a dictionary out of the pydantic model object you've created. And now let's go ahead and return a message. So if not, so this one is actually tricky, because then if there is no post by that ID, I have to throw an error, which is this. So I have to go ahead and throw an error. So I can do something like, if not post trace value error, post not found. Basically, if we try to get a post and it's not found, we shall raise that value error. Then we shall think of a way to return it via an exception handler. So I'll have to go to routes, and then I'll do something like return updated post. And then for deleting, this is going to be returning a 204 no content response. Therefore, we shall not return any data. I'm going to import the status class, not the status class, but the status module. And then shall access the status dot 204 no content. So for this, we shall delete the post, and then instead of returning anything, we shall just return an empty dictionary, of which it will not also be returned, because this will return this specific status code. I'm also going to type hint this by saying that it's going to return none. All right, then here we are going to be returning updated post, but then I don't want to do that. I want to go ahead and return a dictionary with a message and all that stuff. So message post updated successfully, and then the post itself a minute. Let me come. Then the post itself is going to be something like updated post.model.dump, because yeah, we want to go ahead and serialize it, return it as a dictionary. All right, so I'm missing a comma somewhere here, and that will be it. Okay, so I've defined my methods. I've registered them on a router, just like you see right here. Now it's time to go ahead and test and deal with bugs if I have some. So if I go to my Reflex right here, I'm going to begin with the one for creating a post. So create post, create that. This is going to be a post request, and then we'll make a request to HTTP localhost 8000 slash. This is going to be posts. I don't know why this is hanging. Am I having a problem? Am I having an error? So we see T must be a type. Go to 204. Let me try to see. If I go back here, it seems like I have a mistake somewhere in the delete endpoint. Oh, this is supposed to be a status code, not a response model. Sorry for this. So to go ahead and fix that. I also need to so let me see what is happening here. I guess I have to also provide a status for this. So it's going to be status code, and this is going to be status dot http 201 created. My computer is lagging. Got unexpected keyword status. That's supposed to be status code. Right. Okay, so hoping that everything is working. This thing is going to restart, but my computer is somehow lagging. That is working. Now I'm seeing that the body is missing, meaning that everything is working the way we want. I'm going to provide a JSON body with a title, and then I'll provide a body. So what is going to be, it's going to be the sample title, and then I have a sample body. When I send, you see that the new post has been created. Now I'll try to get, if I get all posts, let me try to rename this to get all posts. I don't know. Try to rename it to get all posts, and I can see that that one post that I created exists now. Let me create a sample post too. Sample title, sample body, send, created. If I get all posts, they're ordered in the way I wanted them. Now let's test those for getting a specific post. Now this is a very simple application that I hope it provides you an understanding of how to deal with building the backend when you're building for a Reflex application. So what I can do is to say get post by ID, and then I can go here and say localhost 8000 slash posts slash, let's say 1. Oh, I need to provide the protocol. So I have an error here. Select or scalar object has no attribute first. So let me try to see. If I go back to my service right here, select post where that. Oh, yeah. The first method is supposed to be called on the result object. So if I send, oh, the server has to first restart. And now I can see that I'm getting the first object, which is good. So I'm going to create the next request, which is going to be the one for updating a post. So this is going to be a patch request. I didn't want this to be a pull request. I just wanted it to be a patch so that someone can update whatever they want. Let me try to go back to my routes. Patch, yeah. So I can say this is going to be my, let me just copy what I have here. And then send, missing the body, provide the body. And then if I send, let's say, the title as, let's say, for modern JavaScript. It's going to be JavaScript technologies to learn in 2025. So if I send this, I have an internal server error, which is coming from mod.dumps. It's called mod.dump. So let me go to where that is, line 53. This is going to be mod.dump, not mod.dump. So yeah, I'm going to wait for the server to restart. And then I will send, and then we see that the post has been updated. So if I try to get the post with its ID, this is weird. Something is weird. We are being told that it updated, but then it hasn't updated. So that seems to be weird. Even the body is null. So I think I have a big problem I have to deal with. Sample body, sample that. Let me try to go ahead and see why that is not happening. Set attribute post key value. If I get the post data as a dictionary, but then I'm not updating the post. Oh, this is interesting. For key value in post data.items, I get the post, which is the post I get here. Let me try to see. Result.fast. I get the post, I get the key and the value. I commit, I return the post. That's a bit weird. Let me try to go back to my routes. Let's see if I get the post model.model.dump. I do post data. then I don't think this will even be locked. So let me try to just do the manual thing that I had initially of doing the same thing with the same method and thinking things will work is insane. Okay, so I'm just going to come right here. If post.title update the post, so post.title is going to be equal to post data dot get title. If post.body that, then session.commit and return the post. It's kind of interesting how this is not being done. Let me try to see. Server has to restart again. So how many people are still watching, and where are you watching from? Okay, let me try to go back here and see if I try to get this post by ID, which is post 1. I'm still getting the same data, which is interesting given the fact that I've been able to update it. Let me actually verify in the database. I have title body, not updated. Why Python, why? I guess I have to go to the docs themselves because I'm tired. I want to go to the query section. This is interesting. I guess I'll just have to continue. One other problem that I've noticed is the front end URL is tending to return the backend, which is actually weird. Just like you see right here, this is not supposed to be the way it is. I guess I am the one who is making a mistake, or let me try to see actually. I'll go and first discover why the update is not working. So after creating our table, migrations, blah blah blah, and to go to the query section. You have to call session dot add and end session dot commit. Okay. So I guess that's the error I had. So let me try to run it the way they want me to run it. And then that. So I'll save. Server has to restart. Let me go and grab some food, and then I'll come back. So it seems like this thing is done. Let me try updating the object again. Internal server error. Null constraint failed for posts.body. Now I think I have to update the models to make that thing nullable, or to make it one that can be null. And it's pretty straightforward how you do it. If you're doing Reflex, you just have to go and define your model, or define your field on the instance, just like the way you can. So if you want a field to be nullable, all you can come right here and do is to do something like but one problem I think I have on my side is having to send a body that is none, which I don't want. So I have to update this from the schemas, not the I have to update this from the schemas and not from the database end. So what I want to do is to go ahead and make sure that I send a body, and that body has to be one that is going to be one that can send one field. That's what I need. So an optional string which equals none. I think when I remove that none part, I can have optional strings that can be left out that do not have any default. Okay, let me try. I send field is required, and the field is body, which is actually optional. So that didn't change things. So one thing that I've also remembered is when I can, is that attribute that you can provide to a pydantic model instance when you're trying to dump it, and then that will help you to exclude some fields. I have to go back and do it from routes, and then I'll do what's that specific method, what's that specific attribute to this method? Exclude and set. So exclude and set is a method that allows you to let me try to Google it so that I can be certain of what I'm talking about. Exclude and set exporting models as well as exporting that. Exclude and set whether fields which are not explicitly set when creating the model should be excluded from the return dictionary. Default is false. Exclude and set was as known as skip defaults. Use of skip defaults is now deprecated. So that means if we come and dump this, we can simply, I don't know if that's what I'm actually returning. I don't know. I don't know if the request, let me try to see. This is the request, I think, that has that specific error. If it's a response, I'll get some weird errors on the server side. So what I'll do is to come right here and say exclude and set is equal to true. So that if we leave out the body, then we can at least have that. Then in here, I can also, but here I want to return the entire object. That's why I don't want to exclude anything. So I'll save and wait for the server to restart. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to RESTFox and try to make the request again. And now we have an internal server error. So the internal server error is telling us not null constraint failed. Okay, so I guess I have to make the change. Good enough we have Alembic to help us with the migration. So what I can do is to just come right here and say all none, something like that, or body equals none. I don't know if that's actually how you create a nullable field in SQL model. I tend to forget those things. Let me go back to reflex.dev, which is actually SQL model. That's what I need. So I need to go to, I think I can even do it via, so this is going to be body and then field, and then I can come right here and say that the default is going to be equal to none. And then I think I can do the same thing for the title, but then I don't want to set this to none. I'm just somehow confused because all I'm doing is to update. If I do not send an optional, what I want is if I send, let me try to actually investigate how to do that. I think I've done it at a certain point in one of the places that I have, in one of the small projects that I've built on this machine. Let me try to open one of those and see on the side, and I cheat and I see how I did it to work. So the string equals none, and then let me actually just try to run the delete and I see. But then this is kind of confusing given the fact that the body is missing. Okay, so set title that. Wait, the title is also not being set where post ID is equal to that. Title is none. I don't want to update the want to do a partial update. Let me first go and grab some food. Right, so come back here and if not post not found. If post or title, post that will get title, post that will get that. Session.commit, session.add, session.commit, but then we are having a problem because we are trying to update the title and the body with none. So let me try to actually find out how I can do that. Okay, so what's the distinction between implicitly setting an optional attribute to none versus explicitly to none? This is why I hate Python type hints. This is why I hate Python type hints. Type hints. Why type hints? Okay, so what's the best way to do this? Should I do patch or should I do port? I guess I'll have to just do port. But that's then a challenge for me to actually understand how to do that. I want to be in position to send, but then I don't want to be lazy. Let me try to challenge myself. So exclude and set equal to true. So let me try to make this, let me try to understand this. If I, let's say Python 3, and then I import the schema I'm using, so I can say something like from, oh, I have to import a lot of things. So I can say from Reflex blog dot, in this case that's going to be api dot schemas. I'm going to go ahead and import. So this is going to be the, let's say, post update model. Once I have that, cannot import name post update model from that. API that. Let me try to see. It's going to be post update model. Why am I not able to import that? Because it exists. That's weird. That's extremely weird. I wanted to first try getting to set these, because then I'm getting confused as to why this is returning none for the body, and yet I don't want to add the body. Let me try to see. Required an optional fields. I said string none. I don't know if this actually saves me from the error I am getting. I need to wait for the server to restart. The body field is still required. So if I try the unset thing, will it work? Okay. Update params dot model field set. Let me try to see what that actually gives us. I come. Let me try to do something. And I see. Have even failed to import this. That's how weird this is. I failed to import this schema and yet it exists here. What am I going to do? Anyway, what I wanted to do is to run Python, so I guess I can do that inside any file here. So I'll just create a sample.py where I can import the Reflex blog. Does this thing have let me try to do that. So on Reflex, post-edit model. Okay, so once that is done, I'm now going to go ahead and create a post update model with some data. So I guess I have to create post update model or some post update. So it's going to be post update. Going to be post update model, and then I'll set title is going to be sample title. Python sample.py. So I'm missing the sample title here. So what I can do is to say I think that is TensorFlow Identic has a simple solution. The IT internet gives a list of fields that are explicitly initialized versus those that were initialized in default constructor or access was stored in field set attribute to the word. That both attributes are documented. Also, there's an option called exclude and set that uses this parameter internally returns a dictionary. That's weird because then I have to exclude and set equals to true. If this fails, then I'll directly do it because I'm tired and I don't want to. So I'm missing the body. Okay, so what I'll do is to cheat by coming right here, and I'll honestly just problem is we are providing the post update model without. Let me try to see how people set up their models. On none equals none. Input that returns a list of resources. It seems I'm stuck, but then I have to find out this error and it may take me a lot of time. So I guess I'll have to end the live stream here, and I see you guys in the next one. I'm also planning on creating a playlist on this specific topic. So if you would like to watch this specific topic, kindly leave me a comment down in the comment section. I'm beginning to make it a habit to live stream on Saturdays, and yeah, feel free to tell me some of the things you would like me to explore with you. But then I think you've got an idea of how we can set up a backend for a Reflex application. I'm just having a weird error that I'm trying to get out of, and it may take me a lot of time, and yet I'm tired. But what I'm going to do is to maybe organize a playlist where I am a little bit more organized, and then we'll be able to finish this entire application. Thank you for hanging around in this live stream that was not successful, and yeah, I hope to see you in the next video.